Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a really interesting mix of news. It's kind of a snapshot of what's happening both here in Australia and around the world, all pulled from one recent briefing.
Yeah, we'll be looking at elections and big economic decisions and even some international power plays that could reshape the global landscape.
Okay, so let's start right here at home with the upcoming election. The latest polls from YouGov and Redbridge are suggesting that we might be in for a hung parliament.
Well, yeah, the polls indicate that while the coalition might win, they might not get a clear majority.
Right.
And that would mean that they would need to form alliances with independent figures like Bob Katter and Day Lee if they want to govern.
So it could be pretty messy.
Yeah, it could be. And interestingly, though, Peter Dutton has said he wouldn't work with the Greens.
It gets even more interesting when you factor in Monique Ryan.
Right.
She claims she reached out to Dutton about possibly working together, but he wasn't interested. With the election deadline just a few months away on May 17th, things are definitely heating up. What could a hung parliament mean for Australia?
Well, a hung parliament would inject a whole lot of uncertainty into Australian politics.
Yeah.
Think about it. We could see drawn out negotiations and compromises on key policies and, maybe even another election down the line. It'll be interesting to see how the different parties navigate this situation.
For sure. Okay, so let's switch gears from the political arena to the economy. There's a lot of buzz about the Reserve Bank of Australia, or the RBA, potentially cutting interest rates for the first time in years.
Yeah.
And they might do it as early as Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday, it's a big decision that has everyone watching closely. The market is anticipating a 25 basis point cut,
Okay.
which would bring the rate down to 4.1%.
Right.
This is mainly due to some positive trends in inflation and a shift in the RBA's approach. They seem to be more open to cutting rates now than they have been in the past.
Commonwealth Bank and Westpac economists are even predicting multiple cuts throughout the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about that.
However, it's not a unanimous view. HSBC's chief economist, Paul Bloxham, thinks a cut is likely, but he's not entirely convinced that it's the best move right now. What would these rate cuts actually mean for people listening? Like, how would it affect their everyday finances?
Well, that's the key question, right? If the RBA does cut rates, it could affect everything from your mortgage to your savings account.
Right.
So, for example, lower rates could make borrowing cheaper,
Yeah,
which might make it easier to manage your mortgage payments.
for sure.
On the flip side, though, you might see a lower return on your savings.
True.
It's definitely a trade-off to consider.
Yeah, definitely something to watch out for. Let's zoom out now to a global story with some serious implications. There are reports swirling that Intel, the giant chip maker, might be broken up.
Yeah.
It feels almost symbolic, like the old guard of tech is facing a major shakeup.
Well, it's definitely a significant development. We're hearing that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, better known as TSMC,
Yeah.
and Broadcom are each considering acquiring parts of Intel. Broadcom is apparently interested in design and marketing, while TSMC is eyeing Intel's manufacturing plants, possibly through a consortium.
Why is this such a big deal? I mean, companies merge and split all the time, right?
Well, this situation is different because Intel was once the undisputed leader in the chip industry,
Right.
but lately they've been struggling to keep up, especially in the booming AI market.
So they're kind of falling behind.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay.
And this potential breakup could be a sign of just how fiercely competitive the tech landscape has become, particularly in the race for AI dominance.
So it's not just about one company's fate, it's about who's going to control the future of AI. Now let's switch gears to international politics, where Donald Trump is making some bold moves.
Yeah, he's back.
His sudden push for Ukraine peace talks has definitely caught a lot of people off guard, especially since he seems to be bypassing European allies. He even sparked an emergency summit in Paris.
Yeah, Trump's move is a major power play, and it has sent shockwaves through Europe.
Yeah, no kidding.
He went directly to Putin and announced immediate negotiations, initially excluding Europe from the process. What's striking is that this isn't just talk. The U.S. and Russia are actually scheduled to meet in Saudi Arabia this week with the goal of achieving a ceasefire in Ukraine by Easter.
While the U.S. insists Ukraine will be involved eventually, European leaders are understandably uneasy about this whole approach. Do you think this could damage the relationship between the U.S. and Europe? I mean, they've always been such strong allies.
Well, this situation definitely raises questions about the future of the transatlantic alliance.
Yeah.
It could erode trust and impact their ability to make joint decisions in the future.
Right.
And then there's the bigger picture. What message does this send to Putin? What does it mean for the war in Ukraine? World leaders are definitely grappling with the potential consequences.
From one conflict zone to another, let's talk about the situation in Gaza. Even though there's a ceasefire in place, things still feel incredibly fragile.
You're right, the ceasefire is very precarious. Adding to the tension, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just visited Israel, where he fully endorsed Israel's goals, even calling for the complete eradication of Hamas. And then, of course, there's Trump's controversial proposal. He wants to transfer Gaza's Palestinian population and redevelop the territory under U.S. ownership.
Wow, that's a bold move. Is that even feasible?
It's incredibly controversial, to say the least.
Yeah,
Netanyahu supports the idea, but it's facing massive international condemnation.
I can imagine.
And the situation on the ground remains volatile. Just recently, an Israeli airstrike killed Palestinian police officers who were securing aid trucks.
It's a heartbreaking reminder that even with a ceasefire in place, the situation in Gaza is far from peaceful. What are the chances of a lasting peace in this region?
Well, it's hard to be optimistic given the deep-seated historical and political complexities at play.
Right.
Achieving lasting peace would require a monumental shift in the dynamics of the conflict, and that doesn't seem likely in the near future.
Let's pivot back to the tech world, but this time with a focus on AI and its ethical implications. News Corp has taken a pretty big step. They've banned their staff from using DeepSeek's chatbot.
Yeah, that's significant, especially coming from a media giant like News Corp. You know, it reflects a growing awareness of the potential risks associated with AI, particularly when it comes to data security and responsible use. What prompted this decision was a review by News Corp's cybersecurity team, which raised concerns about potential security and privacy breaches. And it's not just News Corp that's taking action.
Yeah, I was going to mention that DeepSeek is actually facing scrutiny globally. The Australian government has also banned its use on federal devices.
Oh.
Robert Thomson, News Corp CEO, has been warning about the dangers of generative AI for a while now, particularly when it comes to issues like copyright and content ownership. Do you think this is the start of a wider backlash against AI?
It's hard to say for sure, but it does seem like we're reaching a turning point.
Yeah.
The ethical and societal implications of AI are coming under increasing scrutiny, and we're likely to see more regulations and guidelines emerging as governments and organizations try to navigate this rapidly evolving landscape.
From AI concerns to corporate rivalries, let's look at what's happening in the food delivery arena. Uber is taking on DoorDash in court, accusing them of anti-competitive practices that are hurting both restaurants and consumers. It sounds like a real David versus Goliath battle.
No, it definitely has that feel. DoorDash currently dominates the U.S. market with a 63% share, while Uber lags behind at 25%. Uber claims DoorDash is using tactics like coercing restaurants into exclusivity deals and threatening higher commission rates for those working with Uber. They argue that these practices create an unfair playing field and have cost them millions in revenue.
So Uber's essentially saying that DoorDash is using their market dominance to stifle competition. Do you think Uber's accusations have merit, or is this just a case of sour grapes?
It's hard to say without seeing the evidence presented in court.
Yeah, true.
However, the lawsuit does raise important questions about how we regulate competition in the tech industry, especially in sectors where network effects and platform dominance play such a crucial role.
So the outcome of this case could really set a precedent.
Yeah, it could have major implications for both companies and reshape the dynamics of the food delivery industry.
We'll definitely be following this case closely. And for our final story today, let's shift our focus back to the international scene. It seems like there's growing tension between the U.S. and Europe, and things got pretty heated at the recent Munich Security Conference.
It was a pretty tense moment. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance made some controversial remarks about Europe's commitment to democratic values and free speech, even comparing certain European regions to authoritarian regimes. His comments sparked a strong rebuke from German leaders, including Chancellor Scholz and Defense Minister Pistorius.
Wow, that's some serious diplomatic friction. Is this just a temporary spat, or is it a sign of deeper cracks in the transatlantic alliance?
It's difficult to say whether this is just a blip on the radar or a sign of a more fundamental shift in the relationship between the U.S. and Europe. The transatlantic alliance has faced challenges before, but it has also proven to be remarkably resilient.
Oh, that's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
We've gone from Australian elections to global power plays, from AI anxieties to food delivery feuds. It's amazing how interconnected all these seemingly disparate events actually are.
It really highlights how events in one part of the world can have ripple effects across the globe. We live in a complex and interconnected world, and understanding these connections is essential for navigating the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
It's fascinating to think about how all these events fit into bigger trends. For example, we're seeing traditional alliances being tested and new power dynamics emerging on the global stage. It feels like we're at a pivotal moment, wouldn't you say?
I agree. Yeah, it's a time of immense change, and it can be hard to keep up, let alone, make sense of it all. But I think this also presents a huge opportunity. Think about it, the potential of AI to revolutionize fields like healthcare and education, and even how we tackle climate change is incredible. But to harness that potential responsibly, we need to be actively involved in shaping how AI develops.
That makes sense. We can't just sit back and be passive observers. Speaking of AI, you mentioned earlier that Intel is struggling to keep up in that race. What are the stakes in this race for AI dominance, and why should we care who wins?
Well, AI is already transforming our lives in countless ways, from how we work to how we interact with the world around us. The countries and companies that control AI will have a significant influence on the future.
So it's not just about technological advancement. It's about who gets to shape the future. But what does that look like in practical terms? How could this potential Intel breakup affect the average person?
Well, Intel is a major supplier of chips for everything from computers and smartphones to cars and home appliances. A breakup could disrupt the supply chains, potentially leading to higher prices or delays in getting the latest gadgets. Remember those chip shortages a few years ago that affected everything from cars to gaming consoles? This could be similar.
So this isn't just a story about corporate boardrooms and stock prices. It could have a real impact on our wallets and our access to technology. Now, going back to Trump's surprise move on Ukraine, it seems like he's trying to position himself as a peacemaker. But a lot of people are questioning his motives. Do you think he's genuinely committed to peace, or is this just a political play?
It's always difficult to know what's driving a political figure's actions, but Trump's move has certainly shaken things up. By bypassing European allies and engaging directly with Putin, he's signaled a willingness to operate outside of traditional diplomatic channels. And remember, this isn't just talk. The U.S. and Russia are actually scheduled to meet in Saudi Arabia this week with the goal of achieving a ceasefire in Ukraine by Easter.
It's a bold move, but it feels incredibly risky. What happens if his strategy backfires? Could this actually weaken the West's position and embolden Putin?
Well, those are valid concerns, yeah, and the potential consequences are significant. Trump's actions could potentially save lives and de-escalate the conflict, but they could also backfire, leading to further instability and even greater tensions between Russia and the West.
And what about the impact on U.S.-Europe relations? He seems to be sidelining some of America's closest allies.
Yes, that's a key concern. This move could damage trust and make it harder for the U.S. and Europe to work together on other pressing global issues. The transatlantic alliance has always been crucial for maintaining global stability, and any cracks in that alliance could have far-reaching consequences.
Speaking of complex geopolitical situations, the fragile ceasefire in Gaza is a stark reminder of the challenges in achieving lasting peace in regions with long-standing conflicts. What are your thoughts on Trump's proposal to transfer Gaza's Palestinian population and redevelop the territory under U.S. ownership? It seems like a radical solution, to say the least.
It's an incredibly controversial idea that has been met with widespread condemnation. Critics argue that it's not only impractical, but also deeply unethical and potentially violates international law.
It does seem like a very simplistic solution to a very complex problem, and it raises questions about who would actually benefit from such a plan and who would pay the price.
Any attempt to impose a solution without the consent and involvement of the people directly affected is unlikely to succeed. A lasting peace in Gaza can only be achieved through dialogue, negotiation, and a genuine commitment to addressing the root causes of the conflict, including the rights and aspirations of both Palestinians and Israelis.
It's a reminder that peace building is a long and complex process, and there are no easy answers. Shifting gears back to the tech world, let's talk more about News Corp's decision to ban DeepSeek's chatbot. It seems like there's a growing awareness of the potential downsides of AI. Is this the beginning of a wider backlash against AI?
It's certainly a sign that we're entering a new phase in our relationship with AI. As AI becomes more powerful and integrated into our lives, we're starting to see a growing awareness of the potential risks, especially in terms of privacy, security, and the spread of misinformation.
It's like we're moving beyond the honeymoon phase of AI and starting to grapple with the ethical complexities.
Exactly. We need to move past the hype and start having serious conversations about how to ensure that AI is developed and deployed responsibly. This includes addressing issues like bias in algorithms, the potential for job displacement, and the need for clear regulations and ethical guidelines.
Robert Thomson, News Corp's CEO, has been particularly vocal about the potential for AI to be used to create and spread fake news. It's a scary thought, especially given how much we rely on social media and online platforms for information. I mean, how do we even begin to navigate that?
It's a serious concern, and it highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking skills. We need to be able to evaluate information sources, recognize signs of manipulation, and distinguish between fact and fiction. Deepfakes videos or audio recordings that appear authentic but are actually fabricated are becoming increasingly sophisticated, and they have the potential to undermine trust in institutions, manipulate public opinion, and even incite violence.
It's almost like we need to develop a new set of digital antibodies to protect ourselves from the viruses of misinformation. It feels like a constant arms race between those who want to manipulate information and those who are trying to safeguard the truth.
That's a great analogy. Yeah. We need to be vigilant, informed, and proactive in safeguarding the integrity of information in the digital age. It's not just about being skeptical of everything we see online, but also about supporting credible sources of information and promoting media literacy.
Okay, for our last deep dive in this segment, let's take a closer look at the legal battle between Uber and DoorDash. It's a fascinating glimpse into the world of corporate competition and the challenges of regulating the rapidly evolving tech industry.
It's a classic case of a disruptive newcomer challenging an established player. DoorDash has rapidly become the dominant force in food delivery, and now Uber is pushing back against what it sees as unfair competition.
It's like a high-stakes game of chess, with each company making strategic moves to gain an advantage. But the stakes are high not just for these companies, but also for consumers and the entire restaurant industry.
That's right. The outcome of this lawsuit could significantly impact the future of food delivery. It could determine whether the market remains dominated by a single player or becomes more competitive with more choices and potentially better prices for consumers.
And this case also raises questions about the role of government in regulating the tech industry. Should regulators intervene to prevent anti-competitive practices, or should they let the market sort itself out?
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. On one hand, regulators need to ensure a level playing field and protect consumers from the potential harms of monopolies. On the other hand, too much regulation can stifle innovation and limit consumer choice.
It's a delicate balancing act. And with technology evolving so rapidly, it's a challenge for regulators to keep up.
Absolutely. This challenge requires collaboration between governments, industry leaders, and experts to find solutions that promote innovation while protecting the public interest. It's not about stifling progress, but about ensuring that progress benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's a tough question, but listening to all this really makes you wonder what the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity are for the future.
That is a great question, and a tough one to answer. I think the biggest challenge we face is navigating the increasing complexity and interconnectedness of the world. Climate change, pandemics, economic inequality, these are all global issues that demand collective action and cooperation to solve.
And for the biggest opportunity, what gives you hope?
Well, for me, the biggest opportunity lies in harnessing the power of technology to address these challenges and create a more sustainable, equitable, and prosperous future for everyone. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad. It all comes down to the choices we make.
Speaking of choices, the Australian election is right around the corner. What impact do you think the outcome will have on the country's direction? Especially given those polls we talked about earlier.
Well, if we do end up with a hung parliament, things could get very interesting. It might force the major parties to work more collaboratively with independents, which could lead to more diverse perspectives and policy solutions. It could be a positive change.
But it could also lead to gridlock and instability.
Oh, that's true, yeah. There's always that risk. It really depends on the willingness of the different parties to compromise and find common ground. The key issue that seems to be on everyone's mind is the cost of living. Rising costs for housing, healthcare, and everyday essentials are putting a real strain on households.
And it's interesting that both Labor and the coalition are getting low marks from voters on those issues. It makes you wonder if voters are looking for something different, maybe a fresh perspective.
It's definitely possible. This could be a good opportunity for independent candidates or smaller parties who can connect with voters on a more personal level and offer alternative solutions. People are looking for someone who understands their struggles and has a plan to address them.
Okay, last question before we wrap up.
Yeah.
We talked about Trump's proposal for Gaza, and I'm still struggling to wrap my head around it. What are the chances that something like that could actually happen?
To be honest, the chances are pretty slim. It's a highly controversial idea that has drawn widespread criticism. Critics argue that it's impractical, unethical, and likely to violate international law.
It does seem like a very simplistic approach to an incredibly complex and sensitive issue.
Exactly. Any attempt to impose a solution without the consent and involvement of those affected is likely to backfire. A lasting peace in Gaza can only be achieved through dialogue, negotiation, and a genuine commitment to recognizing the rights and aspirations of both Palestinians and Israelis. It's a long and difficult process, but it's the only way forward.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground, and it's clear that we're living in a time of rapid change and uncertainty. What's your final takeaway for our listeners?
Well, we live in a complex and interconnected world, and the decisions made by individuals, governments, and corporations have ripple effects that extend far beyond their immediate sphere of influence. It's more important now than ever to stay informed, engage in thoughtful discussions, and use your voice to advocate for a future that aligns with your values.
Well said. We've only scratched the surface of these complex and fascinating issues today, but we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some food for thought.
Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.